met. Look forward to doing that afterwards. And hello to my friends, Elizabeth and James from Hillsborough.
Woo, yes.
They didn't come just to see me, but they were in the neighborhood. So glad to have you here. So you know how in life there's our plan and then there's God's plan? So I just want you to know that our plan was that I would talk about 4 ways of being for a great life today. And our plan was I'd do a workshop today. I'm not doing either. So what I am going to do is talk to you about the 6th power, the 6th out of the 12 powers of man, which it was so inspiring to me. And I just want to share that inspiration with you. And in terms of the Life of Power workshop, which I was going to offer, there'll be another day in the future, which I will. So stay tuned. Yes?
Yeah.
And you forgive us for the shift, right? Of course. So in this 6th power, it's about power, dominion, and mastery. It's pretty awesome, power, dominion, and mastery. And it is in complete alignment with the unity principles, the science of mind principles. I'm an ordained science of mind minister. That these new thought principles are about power, dominion, and mastery. And the 6th power is in the throat or the base of the tongue, which is about your word, right? And so we know that the speaking of our word, the singing of our word, the praying of our word, the feeling of our word is that which goes before us and creates all that we see in form. We know that the word precedes, or the word or consciousness precedes form. So this was perfect. It was just perfect. So it's important to know that we're talking about spiritual power, though, not ego power. That when we talk about power and dominion and mastery, we're actually talking about spiritual power, though power, dominion, and mastery do belong also to the ego, right? We can look right into our world right now and know that that 6th power, the power of the word and the chakra does go forth and create things in the world as well. Not really create, it doesn't really create things we want, but it doesn't negate the science of being. It doesn't negate the principle, which, the gravity doesn't care whether you believe in it or not, that, if you walk off a cliff, you're going to splat wherever you are, whether you think it's good or bad or agree with it. The science of the creativity principle that the word goes forth and creates is also the same way. It doesn't matter whether you're touched by the spirit or touched by the ego, the principle itself is true. So Science of Mind the Science of Mind Centers for Spiritual Living, it's now called, has had for the last 10 years this idea of a world that works for everyone. And a world that works for everyone really means 2 things. It means, first and foremost, a world that works for you. So a world in which you are experiencing your power and your mastery and your dominion. It involves you experiencing a life that is authentic and free and abundant and healthy and joyful, that we repudiate this idea that we are born in original sin and that our job is to suffer until we die, so when you die you can go to heaven and have a good afterlife. We want heaven to be here. We want all of those qualities of the spirit to be present in your living now. And a world that works for everyone also means that we live in a world in which there is no war, there is no violence, there is no abuse, there is no bigotry, there is no envy, there is no isms, that we live in a world in which anyone and everyone, nobody excluded, is living a free, full, authentic life. And the most important thing about that is that what we also know is that's not possible till it's possible for you. That you and I are the ones that we must do our inner work, because individual transformation is the doorway into global transformation. It's a doorway into global change. So this chapter, I don't know that any of you are actually reading this book, but it's not for the faint of heart. I had to read this. Unity ministers and Science of Mind ministers are trained differently. So Unity ministers get a lot more Bible orientation than we do. So I had to Fillmore's deep. Right, he's just deep. So I had to read it and read it. So I've earned my money today. Because I took your minister seriously. She said, well, we're doing the 6th power. Do you want to do that? And she really meant within the context of my talk, but I heard it. Talk about this chapter. So Fillmore says, man should apply the power of the word to his personal redemption and then speak the redeeming word of spirit to the multitudes. Right? So we need to to apply this word to our own redemption. Our own redemption simply means our own redeeming of all of the things that keep us bound, all of the things that keep us puny and small, all of the things that keep us wishing we were somewhere else doing something else with more, right? There are very few people, in fact, to walk up to somebody and say, how's it going? Do you have everything you need? No, I could use more money, more time, more love, more peace, more joy, more attention. But to live a fully sufficient life is to really be living in the overflow, yes? So this personal redemption means to really apply these principles to our own life. And then once that happens, then go out and speak whatever word you have to speak so that we become people who lift other people. He says, Fillmore says, man does not exercise the power of his spiritual nature because he lacks understanding of its character and of his relation to the originating mind in which he exists. So spiritual understanding is necessary for us to really practice the principles that we learn, right? Because we do learn them. Every Sunday somebody talks to you about the principles. I'm sure many of you have done classes. I'm sure many of you have an active meditation life. I'm sure many of you pray on a regular basis. And yet there seems to be this gap between all of that knowing and that work and actually have it manifesting in our personal lives. And I don't have to know your personal life to know that that's true. I just have to look at the world we live in. And I know that not enough of us are actually abiding in a peace that passes all human understanding. If we were, there would be more peace on the planet. So in the person of Jesus, we have an example of what's possible for us, not an exception. Traditional religion would have us think that Jesus was somehow better, special or unique, that he was the Son of God in a way that you and I are not, and that our job is to really follow him. What he really was an example. He taught us that what he did, we can do. That what he acquired, we can acquire. What he attained, we can attain. There are many, by the way, many like him who have been able to acquire spiritual power, dominion and mastery, and actually exercise it in human affairs. Buddha, there are many, yes, and none of them were exceptions. I mean, they were examples of in that they could do it, you and I can do it as well. So the only difference between Jesus and you is that he had an awareness of the spiritual power that he inherited from the same power and presence that we call God that you and I inherited. He simply was aware of it. He said, all power is given me in heaven and on earth. In heaven being mind, and earth being body. In heaven being spirit, and earth being form or matter. That all power is given to me. He taught us that this power, this God we're talking about, is a power that is within us, not simply way off over there somewhere. So we read, we study, we go to classes, we come to church on Sundays, we pray, we meditate, we do masterminding, we do vision boards. How many of you have done those things? And like the apostles, we gather at the feet of our teachers. We gather at the feet of our sacred texts. And we are inspired by them. We do sit around and we do learn and we do study. And we do really, even at some level, believe. However, not all of us have actually then take all of that and heal the sick and raise the dead. And the promise is that if we were actually in the consciousness or in the vibration of this, that's exactly what we would do. That we would walk up, that we would be our own redemption in our own lives, that our suffering would end in whatever area that we experience suffering. And by the way, it's not a crime to experience suffering. It's kind of the nature of being in this world only, like being firmly rooted in the mortal life or the carnal mind or whatever, the ego, whatever you want to call it. Suffering is kind of comes with the territory, because that's the ego's job, is to make sure we suffer as much as possible in order for it to survive. But the more we begin to abide in a spiritual consciousness, the less suffering there is. The more we abide in spiritual consciousness, the more we are available to be not only to be part of the reconfiguration of our own lives, but the reconfiguration of the world itself. Are you with me? I talk really fast, but you're with me? Do I have one slow down? So Fillmore says, no one can do any great overcoming work without spiritual power, dominion, and mastery. So nobody can do spiritual work without power, dominion, and mastery. Now, dominion and mastery are very interesting words here because they mean that we have power over the world. We have power over our past. We have power over our circumstances. We have power over what the newspapers say, right? We have power over what happened to us at work yesterday. The dominion means we have more power than all of those things. And there are very few among us who believe that, right? That I would word that we are at the effect of those things. That, and we live with if onlys. Like, I would be more successful if only. Whatever your if only is. I would have more love in my life, but I can't because, we all have that. It comes with, Don Miguel Ruiz, the author of The Four Agreements, talks about the domestication of humans. That regardless, that we were born an original blessing, we were born with this spiritual consciousness and nature totally intact, and through the process of life itself, we got domesticated and forgot, right? So when I learned something very new in reading this chapter, which I just love, and it actually has been so powerful for me. It's probably changed how I will work with people forever, which is the Pentecost. Am I the only one who doesn't know what that is exactly? Do you all know what the Pentecost? Who doesn't know what the Pentecost is? Oh, come on. Okay. I was going to say, really? I'm the only one.
Probably.
Yeah. So, God, I could have had a V8. I could have had a personal Pentecost. So the Pentecost is, so we all know about the crucifixion and the resurrection, right? So the crucifixion happened on a Friday. The resurrection happened on a Sunday. And I could do a whole sermon on the metaphysical meaning of those two events for us, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do one on the Pentecost. So the Pentecost occurred 50 days after the resurrection. It happens 50 days after Easter. And what that was the moment when the Holy Spirit descended upon the 12 apostles and empowered them with spirit and gave them spiritual power, dominion, and mastery. It's called the first day of when the day the church was created. Why? Because up until that time, the apostles were followers, not leaders. Up until that time, they sat at Jesus' feet and believed him, worshipped him, loved the teachings, knew that they were true, but they had not received the spiritual power they needed to redeem their own lives and thus go out and share what they knew with the multitudes. Ernest Holmes used to say, you cannot teach what you do not know. You can talk about what you've learned, but that is not as powerful as teaching what you know, right? And how your multitudes, whether it's your children or your parents or your co-workers or your community, your church or your politicians, how they will know that you have, as Jesus would say, have come out from among them, is when you are walking your walk and talking your talk and proving the power of spiritual power in your life. And how do you do that? You do that when you're at peace, when you're abundant, when you're healthy, when you're happy, when you're excited, when you're exuberant, when you're inspired, right? Not when you're not when we are at the effect of circumstances. Could you imagine Jesus trying to heal the leper if he was having personal problems at home, right? Or if he was, had a toothache? He transcended. The idea of spiritual power is that we transcend the things of this world. So he says so we have to be willing. So the question is, are we willing to receive our personal Pentecost, our baptism in the Spirit? Are we willing? Are we willing? Are you willing? Yeah, I mean, why not? Why not be willing? Now, it sounds like a tall order because mostly we abide in that, I'm just a human being. The truth is, you're not just a human being. You are a spirit. You are made in the image and likeness of God itself. That God did not create you, God became you. And in that becoming, you and I, even though God is in everything, and she is, I know that she is. She's in every tree, every cat, every carrot. And I've had people want to argue with me that carrots and tigers and people are the same. I'm going to tell you that they are not the same. It doesn't mean that life's not in the carrot, because life is in the carrot. But carrots do not think. Carrots do not have the power, they do not have this throat and the power of the word, nor does a tiger. Now, some people will argue with me that tigers think, but I don't think so, really. If they do, I want to know what language they think in, right? But tiger language, yes. But do they think things like, oh my God, I think that man's going to capture me right now and put me in a zoo? Probably not, right? No, I don't want to go there. I've had deep conversations over vodka martinis about this, arguing with people whether their dogs think or not. And I don't really want to talk about it after this either, so don't bring it up. I'll kiss you on the cheek and say, I'm really not going there with you. But we need this baptism of the Spirit. We need to be touched by something which has us know that what we know is true and real. Because if we believed it was true and real, nothing would stop you from standing firmly rooted in the truth of your spiritual power. Nothing. That you would, Will, do you guys know Will Bowen? He wrote The Complaint-Free World. And he had this beautiful thing where he says that our minds, our ego minds, create all kinds of negativity and complaints and grievances and all this crap, right? And that the only thing that keeps it doing that is that we give it voice. It's not that you think it, that's the problem, it's that you say it out loud. And every time you say it out loud, your brain's like a manufacturer, and your mouth is the customer. And when it manufactures this stuff and your mouth buys it and spreads it, that it keeps it doing that. And he says, if you will just not speak it, your brain will retool itself, which is very powerful. So it means that how you get to participate is you just don't go to the water cooler and talk about the current election the way that you have been, right? Nor do you listen the way that you have been. That becomes a different conversation. I can't remember which sage it was, but some sage or saint said, think carefully before you speak to see if it improves upon the silence.
I love that.
So when we understand the science of being, when we understand the way that the law works, the law of attraction, the laws of reciprocity, the laws of giving and receiving, the laws of mental equivalence, when we understand the science of being, which in New Thought teachings, we're teaching them. So there is something within you that does understand them, that there is something to these principles and laws. It's easier to understand why it's so important to make ourselves available to this baptism of the Spirit, to this personal Pentecost. So there are I want to just present 5 benefits, if you will, about allowing this baptism to happen for you. One is and these are Fillmore's, I'm not making these up, these are captured from this book, is that to understand that the word opens the door between the formless and form, right? That how you speak, what you speak is your tool. It's actually a tool for creating matter. And when you're spiritually imbued, the matter you create will be different than the matter you create when you're not. It gives you access to the astral ethers. So we teach that there is a universal consciousness. There is a universal mind in which everything exists. Anything, any words ever spoken exist there. Any knowledge ever gained exists there. Everything you ever want to know exists there. Other things exist there too. So Jesus said at some moment, watch, right? Because only you can stand guard at the portal of your consciousness. But that once you are spiritually accentuated and motivated, you have access to everything in the astral ether. So you're no longer alone here. And Fillmore would say it's how every great artist does great art, how every great singer does great songs. and great music. How Jesus does his work is that we have access to this sublime spiritual knowledge that is everywhere. He says that conscious attunement to spiritual identity gives you an influx of power. So once you have been anointed and appointed, when you need spiritual power, you tune in. Jesus did this. He would just go, right? He would go up into the mountains. He would come down, do his work, amongst the people, and then he'd say, hold on, I need a little influx of spiritual power. Let me go connect. That's what you and I need to do. It's what we do in meditation. We go and connect. I love, maybe I did add this one. Well, I reworded it to fit my own personality. Fillmore was a little too serious about it. So I like to say that that one of the things we want to achieve is an experience of unbotherability. So that when you read the newspaper, so when something occurs around you, that you are so clear about the omnipotence and the omnipresence of spirit that you are unbotherable. Right? That you don't care about the flux of the stock market or who gets elected to president even. That you just know that the spiritual power is more power, has more dominion and more mastery over what occurs here than anything that human beings without that spiritual power can dream up. So unbotherability. Can you imagine being in life unbotherable? Not at peace, no matter what happens around you. And then 5 is, Fillmore says that unity, this kind of unity, destroys the idea of years and declining power. That it repudiates this idea that we are merely mortal, that we are born, right? We rise, we age, we're in our prime, we accomplish great things, and then, hit 50, downhill from here. How many of you have heard that? Downhill from here. Well, we all know this because look at us. I mean, 60, 70, 80, 90 never looked as good as this. So, Fillmore says, so be willing to receive your personal Pentecost, right? Just be willing to receive it. Be willing to somehow inexplicable in my work, my Life of Power work that I'll share with you sometime, that one of the things I love about it is that I know how to create, I'm like a paradigm shifter. I mean, you know the shapeshifters? We need to learn how to be paradigm shifters and context creators, which means that you have the ability to speak a new reality into your experience without evidence. I call it creating something out of nothing, because you cannot look back into your experience, and which is why we're so, I don't know the right nice word I would use.
Do you need a nice one?
Well, no. But mostly I've been doing ministry for 15 years now, and very, very few people actually take these teachings and quantum leap themselves into a new experience. That there's, and why is because we keep looking to see if there's evidence that we can do it. But our self-esteem on a human level only, on the ego will never tell you that you can heal the sick and raise the dead. Never. They'll never tell you that, your ego will never tell you that you can be free, that you can be abundant, that you can be outrageously healthy, that you can be amazingly successful. It's not the way it works. It's going to keep you small, right? So I'm going to close with some Fillmore quotes because they are beautiful. He says, but man can never be free until he declares his freedom. So your freedom is a declaration, an existential declaration out of nothing, that you stand right here in this chair. I am free. Today I am free. To say it. Today I am free.
Today I am free.
It's a declaration, right? It is the prerogative of every person to make this declaration and thereby rise above the world. Still Fillmore, he says, he that rules his spirit is more powerful than he that takes a city. And he talks about, in this chapter, about Alexander, who took every city he could, that he ruled every city, and he died a drunkard at 33. So he could rule with the power of man, but he never had dominion over his own self, over his spirit. Fillmore says, man is the power of God in action. To us is given the highest power in the universe, the power of thought. How many of you have ever spent any time cultivating what I would call a watcher mentality? This part of you that can watch yourself thinking, right? This part of you that can observe you doing and thinking and saying what you do, think, and say. Do it more, right? Because the very fact that that's possible, it's like, who's watching? Like, who is paying attention to you thinking those thoughts? You want to spend more time with the watcher than with your thoughts, right? Because that watcher is the declaring entity, the spiritual entity within you. He says, we are then charged with declaring our freedom of that which binds us and keeps us in bondage. So whatever it is that binds you and keeps you in bondage, practice your dominion, mastery, your power, dominion, and mastery in that area. And everyone has something. You know, you could be really, really strong and certain and powerful with your health, but not so much with money. Or you're really great with money, but not so much with love or friendship or community. So bring the power of the Spirit with you into those areas so that you can prove the principle to yourself, right? And then you become a person who talks to other people about proving it to themselves. He says, we then expand in our dominion and mastery over the appetites, passions, and emotions and restore equilibrium between heaven and earth. We then, you and I then, become as Jesus, or become as the Buddha, or become as, we have, I wanted to call them minor gods, but others, you know, Thich Nhat Hanh, Martin Luther King, these people who were changers of the human scene. And it's because they were inspired by something greater than themselves, something outside of themselves, which gave them dominion. Heaven and earth translates to the mind and the body, or the spirit and matter, right? So there's the mind and, don't you find it interesting that the mind and spirit are connected? Because Fillmore only connects them. He doesn't even talk about the mind, this ego mind, but your mind and spirit are the same. Your earth and the body are the same. Your earth and matter are the same. He says, when enough people have attained this power, a new heaven and earth will appear. And this global heart vision of a world that works for you and a world that works for everyone will be accomplished. And so it is.
So it is.
Mhm.